Hey everyone, my name is KR and thanks for joining me today. Although this time, maybe I should say, hallo allemaal, ik ben KR en bedankt voor het kijken vandaag. Because if you didn't notice, I am Dutch, and those were real Dutch words from a real dictionary. Yeah, I know it sounds like a German having a stroke, but that's just our language, okay? Anyways, you might be wondering, why is it relevant that you're Dutch? Like, genuinely, who cares? Well, bit rude, honestly, but Dutch newspaper Volkskrant, which is Dutch for People's Newspaper, which they aren't, by the way, don't know where they got that name, has decided to launch an attack on the sport I so dearly love, and I've made this entire YouTube channel about. Yes, that's right, they wrote an article attacking bowling, I mean NASCAR, they wrote a bad article about NASCAR. In this article, they claim that NASCAR, due to it being American, is racist, which is ironically pretty racist on their part. But hey, before we begin though, a few disclaimers. Number one, you might see me reading off a script. That's because this article was like written yesterday, and I don't have time to fucking learn this entire thing. I have stuff to do, okay? I've tried to hide this as best as possible, but honestly, I don't know. It might just be really noticeable, so that. For the important disclaimers, this is not a political video. I just want everyone to know this. I'm not here to go into the that's not a fucking word. I don't know why I wrote it. Of what is and isn't racist and discuss politicians and fucking world statistics and whatever. I'm just here to talk about why this article is lying about NASCAR in order to promote a narrative. Secondly, or technically thirdly, I do not condone any harassment towards the writer and the newspaper of this article. I do condone them receiving polite, well-written, formal corrections in their comment section, but don't be immature enough to harass people. Now, why don't we get into it? Let's read this article. The title already screams at you. Translated, it says, NASCAR races are typically American, the racism is never far away. I said this before, but that's pretty racist on their part to just put away an entire country like that, but we'll forgive them as this article gets worse. In our first paragraph, our lovely reporter, Dan, already calls NASCAR the widest sport in the US, which is already the first lie. The actual widest sport is curling, which genuinely no one could care less about, but yeah, so that promises a lot. Following that up, according to Dan, the most unusual details about NASCAR cars are the fact that the headlights are stickers. Not the bright flashing paint schemes, the loud V8 engines, the fact the ground clearance is half that of street cars, or the fact they have no doors. It's the headlights being faked to market the car models they're supposed to be driving. Which is evil, because cars reveal the ugly sides of ourselves. Yeah, I have no clue either. It doesn't elaborate on this, it's just a random quote. He does mention the win on Sunday, sell on Monday motto, even though that hasn't been used since the 1970s. But it shows that he did some research, I guess. Next up, our reporter describes a run-in with two supporters. As he is unfamiliar with the sport, they play a game with him. He has to keep naming numbers between 1 and 100 until he names a driver who he will support in the race. He goes on to name the 37 and 74, both of which he's just a few years late with, before naming the 23, which, given the topic of this article, is very likely not a coincidence. Of course, this is Bubba Wallace's number, which gets a reaction out of our two fans. The reporter quotes our two fans as saying, "You can absolutely not support him." With no context, we're meant to assume this was just some racist quote, but these could just as easily be two Kyle Larson fans still salty about 2022 Las Vegas. Unfortunately, later in the article, they do go on to reveal to be, well, not salty Larson fans. But two fans out of the 114.231 million estimated average viewers is not enough to discount the entire sport. Every sport will have their idiotic Facebook fans, but just interviewing them as a representation is just plain shit. After this, he goes into a bit of the history of NASCAR, talking about the moonshine running and stuff like that, before bringing up critics of the sport call it the non-athletic sport centered around rednecks. Which I have never heard anyone ever call NASCAR? Like, never in my life? Like, even the biggest haters don't make up convoluted acronyms and just tell you to end your own life or something. He then goes into the story of Wendell Scott and the 1963 Jacksonville fiasco. And I mean, yeah, that was pretty racist. But this was the Deep South in the fucking 1960s. Did you expect anything else? It doesn't say anything about the state of the sport in 2023, nor about its fans. It just says there were racists in the 1960s, which is literally the case everywhere. It just seems like using a genuinely horrible event to paint modern NASCAR as racist, which is kind of tasteless. We get one more quote from our two Facebook fans, revealing they hate Bubba because he banned the rebel flag, aka the Confederate flag, which, no, did not happen. The Confederate flag wasn't banned by Bubba because he's not exactly a NASCAR executive that's make those decisions. Worst of all, our reporter agrees with this, although he's seeing it as a good thing. He goes on to tell that because Bubba Wallace had spoken up about Black Lives Matter, a noose was hung in his garage at Talladega, and NASCAR had to respond, after which they banned the Confederate flag. This is just objectively not what happened. What actually happened was that NASCAR banned the flag on June 10th, 2020, in response to the protest going on. And 15 days later, on the 25th of June 2020, the news incident, which Wallace reasonably thought was a threat, although it was later revealed it wasn't, happened. If we look at the timeline here, we can see that our reporter is just blatantly lying, so either he's done zero research for this or is refitting dates to achieve his narrative, both of which are a bad look for a reporter. We once again get a shit story about racism in the 1960s, which once again doesn't say anything about modern day NASCAR, before Dan comes in with another bombshell statistic. Over 40% of the people who live in the province of Darlington, which I'm assuming is Darlington County, is black, but according to his stellar research, which we know is great because he doesn't know how dates work, the overwhelming majority of fans at the track were white. Now the 40% statistic is true, and so is the fact most NASCAR fans are white. But is that due to racism? Or the fact, and I can't believe I have to spell this out, a lot of them might not just be interested in racing? I mean, statistics show they also watch less Formula 1, IndyCar, IMSA, you name it. Is this because every racing series ever is racist? Or because there's just a genuine non-interest in the demographic? It's not their fault they aren't interested, now is it? People watch what they like, not to fill a diversity quota. If you don't want to watch NASCAR, you won't watch it. That doesn't seem hard to believe, and it's easier to believe than every racing series ever in the world being racist. Next up comes the funniest bit, which Dan has unfortunately corrected since he wrote it yesterday, but in short, while talking about Drive for Diversity, he mentions Kyle Larson being Mexican American and Daniel Suarez as Asian American. Not only are these labels just plain incorrect, they're also pretty weird if you think about it. If we put them in the correct order, which he did, eventually, like kudos, he corrects one factually inaccurate thing. Daniel Suarez isn't Mexican American, he's from Mexico. Like, if I go to the US now, I'm not Dutch American, I'm still Dutch. Yeah, and Kyle Larson, he's not Asian American, not just because Asia is an entire continent going from the Middle East to the most eastern part of Russia, which isn't summarized by one label, but also because he was born in the US, he's an American. The correct term would be of Japanese descent, but that was probably too hard for our writer to come up with. During this part, he mentions Wallace, Suarez and Larson as the only diverse drivers, completely ignoring Eric Almirola being as Cuban as Larson is Japanese, and the fact Chris Buescher is ginger and Alex Bowman is a gamer, the two most oppressed groups in the history of the world. A little more serious, NASCAR has a lot of diversity among its main three divisions, and just talking about the Cup Series is missing out on so many diverse drivers, such as Raja Garouf, Jesse Iwuji and Tony Breidinger, whose names I probably all mispronounced, and it feels disingenuous to just leave them out of an article like this. We get some more anecdotal evidence about the fact racists exist and visit NASCAR races, and some more talk about the Confederate flag and the fact you can't stop people from being racist. It's all based on nothing but what our single reporter has seen in one day and the stories he's told. Although there are some interesting tidbits, it's most interesting to note that the black fans he interviews are way more positive about the sport and its future in terms of racism compared to our Dutch white author, who doesn't know anything about the sport and just comes in to bash it, once again revealing our reporter has already made up his mind. After that comes the part about the Let's Go Brandon debacle, in which our author once again lies, claiming that this incident happened during a 2020 race at Talladega, even though this happened in 2021, a mistake of a full year. He also claims the reporter, who is named Kelly Stavros, something our author doesn't mention even though he names everyone else, misunderstood the fans, which, let's be honest, we all know she didn't. She just tried to ignore the idiots yelling political slogans at a car race, and did the best she could. Anyways, we all know what happened, and now it's a popular slogan. He doesn't mention that it ruined Brandon Brown's career and is generally hated by NASCAR fans for perpetuating negative stereotypes around the sport. But I guess that wasn't important. He does mention our two idiots again, and this time talking about how they think it's funny to have Let's Go Brandon written everywhere, and at this point I really just stopped caring about them. Like, wow, you found two morons with an unfunny sense of humor. That sure says a lot about the millions of people who enjoy watching the sport. Next up, he describes the race itself. His ears start to hurt because of the cars, which, okay dude, sure, if you say so. He then goes on to describe the atmosphere in the infield and proceeds to completely contradict his entire article, describing it as welcoming and friendly, and describes everyone just having a general good time watching the race and having fun with each other. He kind of tries some character assassination by talking about Chase Elliott having hooters on his car, but it really doesn't go any further than that. In the end, William Byron wins the race because of the collective deaths of Truex and Chastain. Bubba finishes 5th, and there have been no racist incidents apart from our reporter being at the track. In a lot of ways, this article strongly reminds me of the NBC Dateline incident back in 2006 when they sent, quote, Muslim-looking men to a NASCAR race in Martinsville to provoke a racist reaction because of the exact same stereotypes our Dutch reporter is chasing. What happened? Nothing. No fan had any problems with Muslims being there to enjoy the race with them, even at the height of the war on terror. At the end of the day, to most fans, it doesn't matter what color your skin is, just whether you agreed with Noah Gragson or Ross Chastain back in May. Sure, you'll find some bad apples everywhere, but to write an article like this proclaiming the entire sport is racist, while also showing time and time again you're not knowledgeable about your subject just based on those few experiences, is a disgrace. I'm ashamed to be Dutch because of people like this. You don't start an article with a conclusion before you even research it. That's just bad journalism. It's embarrassing, and luckily the newspaper is getting pushback from Dutch NASCAR fans. But this kind of stuff should never happen again. I'm sorry if this was an angry or depressing video, but I felt the need just to explain how wrong this was, not just to Americans but to my fellow Dutch people as well. Let's make sure stuff like this doesn't happen again. Next time some Dutch reporter arrives at a NASCAR track, let's hope it is to discuss how good the racing product is, an article the sport actually deserves. If you like this video, please let me know by leaving a like. If you want to watch other more positive videos by me, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.